Hello there, my sleepy travelers. The stars are just beginning to twinkle above the gentle hills of the Shire, and the last golden rays of the sun melt into a soft lavender sky. A hush falls over the world as the hearths glow warm behind round hobbit doors, and a breeze carries the faint scent of pipeweed and wildflowers across the fields. You found a quiet moment, and here, in the stillness of twilight, a story waits for you, one that drifts like morning mist over ancient stones and whispers through the trees of forgotten realms. Tonight, we'll wander far from the Shire's peaceful lanes and into the northern wilds of Middle-earth, into lands where kings once ruled and silence now lingers. So nestle in, pull your blankets a little closer, and let your breathing slow. We're about to step into shadowed memory and follow the gentle trail of a crown long broken, but not yet lost. Welcome to a tale of hush and history, of old pride and quiet wonder, the Broken Crown of Arnor. Before we set off on our gentle path, my sleepy friends, allow me to share a soft whisper about the road ahead, just enough to stir your curiosity, never to disturb your rest. Tonight's story drifts northward, beyond the green fields of the Shire, past the Brandywine and the moors, to lands where time moves slower and the wind carries echoes of a kingdom that once stood proud. There, among the cold ruins scattered across the hills of Eriador, lies the faded memory of Arnor, the ancient realm of the northern Dunedain. A realm of wise kings, quiet strength, and enduring sorrow. We shall follow the footsteps of a gentle soul, one who lives quietly at the edge of this forgotten realm, near a forest where no map dares to speak its name. He is no warrior or wizard, just a wanderer of quiet heart and thoughtful gaze. Yet something stirs in the soil beneath his feet, and soon he finds himself drawn to a mystery older than he knows, a fragment of a crown once worn by kings whose names now linger only in wind and stone. The tale is not one of war or triumph, but of remembrance, of still waters and silver stars, of discovering that what is broken is not always lost, and that the softest footsteps can still echo across the ages. If you find comfort in quiet wonder and peace in tales of long-forgotten places, then let this story cradle your heart as the night deepens. And if you wish to wander with us again, perhaps into the Blue Mountains or beyond the Anduin, feel free to gently press the button that keeps these stories returning to you. A soft like, a tender subscribe, and the bell that rings like elven chimes, each one a step further down the road. But for now, just let your mind rest and your eyes grow heavy. The night is kind, and the story has only just begun. Come, let us begin our walk into memory, not far beyond the gentle borderlands of the Shire, where the hills begin to rise and the green takes on a cooler hue. There lives a man named Elric. He is not known to many, for Elric prefers the quiet places, those shadowed by pine and softened by moss. He makes his home near the edge of the North Downs, in a small cottage built of river stone and cedar wood, with ivy curled along the eaves, and a small garden that hums with bees from spring through autumn. Elric is neither old nor young. He moves with the patience of one who has listened to the wind long enough to understand when it speaks. His hair is dark with streaks of silver at the temples, and his eyes, clear gray like the morning mist, often linger on the horizon as if they remember something just out of reach. He keeps to simple habits, tending his hearth, drying herbs in bundles above the kitchen window, reading faded scrolls by candlelight, and walking the same forest path each evening as the sun melts into gold. He does not speak much of his past, but it's said by the few who've shared his fire that his blood runs with a quiet trace of Númenórean strength, though diluted by time and softened by sorrow. Some even whisper that his ancestors once bore the sigil of Arnor, the lost kingdom of the north, whose memory now clings only to broken towers and starlit legends. Each night, after tea and a bit of honey bread, Elric walks beyond the glen, lantern in hand, not searching for anything, but never quite aimless. The wind stirs his cloak, and sometimes the trees seem to lean in, as if listening. And lately, he has felt something, a presence in the soil, a murmur in the stone. Just days ago, while collecting pine cones for the fire, he noticed a mark on a tree that hadn't been there before, an ancient rune, faint and weathered, yet unmistakably carved with purpose. It hummed softly beneath his palm when he touched it, and though he told no one, the warmth lingered in his skin long after the wind had died. That evening, as he sat beside the hearth with his old pipe and a tattered map, Elric's gaze fell upon the northern mountains, beyond Fornost, beyond even the Weather Hills, a place once called Anúminas, and deep in his chest he felt it again, that quiet tug, as if the land itself had remembered him. And so begins our tale, not with thunder or war cries, but with the quiet heart of a man whose past may hold more than he knows, and whose journey, gentle though it may be, will carry him far beyond what even the stars can see. The morning light came softly over the North Downs, filtering through the tall pines with a pale golden shimmer. Elric's cottage, nestled beneath a moss-covered rise, stirred slowly with the waking of the world. The scent of wood smoke curled from the stone chimney, mingling with the dew-heavy fragrance of fir and fern. Birds called gently through the forest canopy, and the distant hum of a brook echoed softly through the stillness. Inside, the hearth crackled with a low flame. Elric moved quietly about his home, spooning dried leaves into a ceramic teapot and setting a pan of oats to simmer. He hummed to himself in an old tongue, a tune passed down from a mother he only remembered in fragments. Soft hands, warm firelight, a lullaby half lost to time. His daily rituals were slow and measured. He swept the floor with a handmade broom of heather and birch. He watered the small garden that clung to the edge of the clearing, lavender, thyme, foxglove, and a twisting vine that had no name but bloomed only under the light of the full moon. He paused often to listen to the rustle of leaves, the chirr of crickets, or the creak of an old wooden beam. To a passerby, Elric's life might seem quiescent to the point of stillness, but to Elric, every moment was filled with layers. The way the wind touched his cheek before a storm, the whisper of a fox's paws over dry needles, the pattern of sunlight on the kitchen table, shifting like ancient runes throughout the day. Life spoke in subtle tones, and Elric listened, yet lately, the tones had changed. It began with the map, a weathered parchment pinned above his writing desk, a gift from an old ranger friend, the sort who came and went like the mist. Elric had traced its lines many times, roads of Arnor long faded, cities fallen into ruin, forests now swallowed by time. But last week, as twilight fell and he studied the faded ink once more, a faint shimmer had danced along the western edge near Lake Evandem. He blinked. It was gone. He tried again in candlelight. Still nothing, but he felt it. And then there were the flowers, the yellow stars, so he called them, small blossoms that only grew near the standing stones in the forest beyond the glen. They had not bloomed in years, yet 3 nights ago they opened all at once under a new moon facing west, as if reaching for something just beyond sight. That evening, Elric had walked deeper into the forest than usual, his lantern swaying gently. The woods were not silent, they never truly were, but something had shifted in their song. The wind no longer rustled through the same branches. The owls called from unfamiliar hollows, and near the base of an old elm, long split by lightning, he found something buried in the roots, a small iron shard, dulled with age, shaped like the tip of a broken crown. It was heavy in his hand, too heavy for its size, and warm. Back home, he'd cleaned it gently with oil and cloth, watching the centuries of earth fade from its surface. Beneath the grime, a single rune emerged, faint but unmistakable, an emblem of the House of Elendil, one of the lost symbols of Arnor's northern kings. He stared at it for a long time, not with alarm, but with a strange calmness, as if something old and forgotten had remembered him. The days that followed were filled with a different kind of quiet, not emptiness, but anticipation. Elric's daily tasks remained the same, chopping firewood, mending his cloak, preparing stews with winter carrots and barley, but the rhythm had changed. His hands moved with the same grace, yet his thoughts drifted more often to the hills beyond the trees and to names long buried in dust. Each afternoon, he read from a small leather-bound book, Chronicles of the North Kingdom. The ink faded, the script written in careful Westron with traces of Sindarin beneath. He lingered on stories of the royal line of Arnor, of Anúminas by the lake, of kings who bore crowns shaped like wings. And in the margin of one page, a note he had never noticed before appeared, scrawled in hurried quill. When the stars return to their forgotten dance, the north shall breathe anew. Elric stared at the note, puzzled. He had read this book dozens of times. How had he never seen it? And who had written it? That evening, he took his tea beneath the birch tree just outside his cottage. The air smelled of pine sap and cool stone. Overhead, the stars began to appear, one by one, each pulsing softly against the velvet sky. Elric tilted his head and whispered a name he had not spoken in years. Elendil. It did not echo, it settled. The wind stirred, and from the distant ridge, just for a moment, he thought he saw a light, faint and flickering, like the glint of a fire far away, or perhaps the gleam of a polished helm catching starlight. The next morning he packed a satchel, not in haste, but with quiet resolution. A journal, the iron shard wrapped in linen, a small loaf of seed bread, a dried apple, and the old map. He did not lock the door. Before leaving, he placed a single blue stone, flat and polished, upon the windowsill. It was a symbol known only to a few, a message for any who might seek him, gone to walk the ancient path. As he stepped into the forest, the mist curled around his boots, and the trees leaned ever so slightly, as if nodding in approval. The first whispers of the past were calling, not loudly, not urgently, but like a song long forgotten, sung once again beneath the breath. And Elric was ready to listen. The path that Elric now followed was old, older than the road-worn stones of the South Farthing, older than even the stories sung by wandering minstrels beneath the stars. It curled gently through moss-covered trees, their trunks twisted like sleeping giants, and the underbrush softened every footfall with the hush of dew-laden ferns. He had no destination, not really, only a direction, westward, toward the blue-tinged hills where the kingdom of Arnor had once stood proud, its banners raised high beside Lake Evandam, long before time gentled its name into silence. Elric walked without haste, letting the forest shape his pace, letting his breath follow the rhythm of rustling leaves. Each day bled softly into the next, and with each step forward, the land seemed to lean in closer. The wind no longer swept wildly, it whispered, curling around his ears like old lullabies. The birds, once scattered and free, flew now in quiet arcs above him, as if escorting an unseen traveler, and the air itself held something more, a presence, subtle and steady, like a gaze just behind your shoulder that never wished to frighten, only to watch. On the third evening, as the twilight mist gathered low and silver, Elric came upon a clearing lit with floating fireflies. But these were no ordinary flickering insects. They shimmered in hues of pale blue and gold, moving not randomly but in quiet spirals, as if they danced to music only the earth could hear. He stepped slowly through them, the warm lights brushing his cheeks, and for a moment the forest was hushed completely, as though it, too, held its breath. At the center of the clearing lay a flat stone, half sunken into the moss. Upon it, etched in nearly invisible runes, was a symbol he had seen only once before, in a book so old its pages had crumbled when turned. The sigil of Valandor, one of Arnor's lost kings, who was said to have vanished into the wilds, searching for a crown that had shattered during the wars with Angmar. Elric touched the symbol gently, and the stone hummed faintly under his palm. Not a sound, more a feeling, deep and low, like the quiet heartbeat of something sleeping beneath. He sat beside the stone, letting his pack fall beside him. The sky had begun to clear overhead, and in the patchwork opening between the trees, he saw the first stars awaken. A cold breeze stirred the ferns. Then, from the edge of the clearing, came a sound, not loud, not sudden, but clear, a chime, as if a bell had rung in a place where no bell should be. He turned, eyes scanning the dim woods. There stood a figure, barely outlined in silver mist. Tall, slender, wrapped in a cloak of gray that shimmered like morning frost. The figure did not move closer, but neither did it vanish. Instead, it raised a single hand, not in warning, but in welcome, and then it spoke, though no lips moved. Elric. The voice was inside him and outside him all at once, soft as leaf fall, ancient as the sea. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. The figure tilted its head, and then, like a breeze that shifts too quickly to follow, it was gone. Elric sat in stillness long after. His hand remained upon the stone, though the warmth had faded. The fireflies had returned to their gentle circling, undisturbed by what had passed. When he finally rose, the stars had moved higher, and the trees rustled once more. He continued west. Over the next days, more signs followed. One morning, while drinking from a spring-fed brook, Elric noticed the water shimmered with faint glints of silver. Not sediment, not fish scales, but light itself. When cupped in his hands, the water felt warmer than it should, and for a brief heartbeat, it tasted of something both sweet and old, like fruit from a tree that no longer grew. That same afternoon, a path appeared between the roots of two oaks where none had been before. It was narrow and overgrown, yet well trodden in the center, as if used by those who left no trace. He followed it. It led him to a grove of white stones, standing in a circle, weathered smooth by time. There, etched faintly upon the tallest stone, was a name: Arvedui, the last king of Arnor. His breath caught gently in his chest. Arvedui had died far to the north, in icy waters and stormed lands, yet here his name remained, as if the land itself still whispered of his fall. Elric knelt by the stone and rested his palm against it. He did not speak. He did not need to. That night, a strange dream took him. He stood atop a snowy ridge, though he felt no cold. Below, a vast city stretched, its towers white and gleaming, its streets lined with lanterns that shimmered like starlight. The city pulsed like memory, like something that had once lived and could live again. At the center, upon a dais of dark stone, lay a crown, broken into 3 shards. Around it, 7 figures stood, cloaked and hooded, one turned toward him. Elric of the West, the voice said, though no lips moved. The time has come to mend what time has scattered. He reached for the crown, but before his fingers touched it, the scene faded like smoke in the morning sun. He awoke beneath the stars, his blanket soaked with dew, his heart beating slow and deep. In the days that followed, the mystery thickened, not with dread, but with wonder. He heard singing from groves where no bird perched, songs in a language older than Elvish, resonating through stone and root. He passed ruins that pulsed faintly with light, as if remembering their own stories. And once, while resting beside a waterfall, he saw something impossible, a silver fish leaping upstream, bearing tiny runes etched into its scales, as if the water itself remembered the speech of kings. And always he felt it, that subtle pull, not like a rope, not urgent, more like the tide pulling gently at your ankles, inviting you forward without ever needing words. It was not a command, it was a call. Each step deeper into the north brought not fear, but peace, as though he were walking not away from something, but home. And so Elric moved onward, the broken shard of the crown wrapped in linen within his satchel, growing warmer with each mile. The woods began to thin, and the sky opened wide above the western horizon. Somewhere ahead, the city of Anuminas lay hidden beneath moss and stone. Somewhere, a throne long empty waited not for a king, but for remembrance. Elric's journey was no longer about discovery. It had become a remembering, and the land itself was waking with him. By the time Elric reached the northern curve of the Weather Hills, the land had grown noticeably quieter, not in the absence of sound, but in the quality of it. The wind no longer rustled hurriedly through the trees. It passed in slow sighs, like a breath remembered. The birdsong, once lively and scattered, had softened into single notes, drawn out like lullabies. Even the brook he followed moved differently, its waters no longer rushing, but meandering, curling like threads through patches of mossy stone. And it was here, in this hush of the world, that Elric first truly saw it. It was midday, though the sun rode low and golden behind a veil of high clouds. The path he walked was an old one, stone-flagged in places, though most of the paving had long since been swallowed by grass and time. He crested a small hill, expecting the same rolling green and silent woods, but the land before him opened suddenly. A vast glade unfurled at the hill's foot. It was ringed by ancient birch trees, their silver bark shimmering faintly even in the cloudlight. In the center, nestled between low rises of earth, stood a single structure, half buried, overgrown with ivy and creeping root. It was a stone archway, not grand or imposing, but precise. Ancient, yes, but not ruined. The lintel stone bore carvings worn by time, yet still clear, a star, a crown, and beneath them, a winding serpent coiled upon itself. Elric felt it before he moved. A stillness, deep and low, settled into his chest like the first note of a song long forgotten. He stepped forward slowly. The grass beneath his boots seemed to hush even further, the very blades bending without resistance. Birds did not sing here, insects did not stir. It was not lifeless, but listening. As he drew near the archway, his breath slowed without command. The air changed, cooler, yes, but also thicker, like it carried the memory of old voices. He stood before the stone, his hand, without thought, rose to touch the serpent carving, and the world shifted, not sharply, not with a jolt, but as if a veil of silk had been drawn aside from his senses. The scent of the glade deepened, no longer just earth and bark, but something older, like ancient cedar wood and the iron of deep stone. A low hippo-hum rose from the ground, too low to be sound, more a resonance that touched the soles of his feet. Then he saw it, not through the archway, but upon it. Letters, runes, they shimmered faintly across the upper stone, invisible before, now glowing softly like moonlight through fog. Elvish, but altered. a dialect older than Rivendell, shaped in the high tongue of Numenor, yet touched by something else. Dwarvish? Or older still, Elric leaned in, letting his fingers drift over the runes without touching them. To he who bears the shard of the crown, the land shall speak again. He stepped back, the meaning settling into his chest like a soft weight. In a moment of quiet instinct, he reached into his satchel and withdrew the linen-wrapped object, the fragment of the broken crown he had found weeks ago buried beneath the floor of a ruined outpost. Carefully, reverently, he unwrapped it and held it before the stone. The change was immediate. The archway shimmered, not brightly, not in a flash, but like a reflection disturbed gently by wind. The runes flared once with silver light, then dimmed again. And then, at the foot of the arch, the ground shifted. A circle of moss faded slowly, revealing a low stone stairway descending into the earth. Elric did not move for a long while. He simply breathed. There was no fear, no dread, only the sense of a moment arrived. He stepped forward. Each stair was worn smooth but solid. The air within the passage was cool, not cold, dry and steady like a long-sealed cellar. Faint lights glimmered along the walls, phosphorescent mosses perhaps, or old magic lingering like breath. They did not pulse or flicker. They simply glowed, offering enough light to guide without ever breaking the dark's embrace. He descended slowly. The stairway curved gently, spiraling downward without haste. The silence was perfect, not oppressive, not void, but peaceful. His footsteps, though soft, seemed welcomed by the stones, not echoed. The descent could have taken minutes or hours. Time had softened here, as if it too had bowed to memory. At last, the stairs leveled. Elric emerged into a chamber. It was not grand, not in the way of dwarven halls or elven sanctuaries, but it was beautiful in its stillness. A circle of stone, smooth walls marked by faint sigils, and at its heart, a pedestal. Upon it lay a second shard of the crown, this one longer, curved like a crescent moon. Its surface bore not dust, but sheen, as though it had been placed only moments ago. And behind it, embedded in the wall, was a mosaic, a delicate arrangement of tiles in blue, silver, and gold, forming the image of a tree broken in the middle, yet growing still from both ends. Elric approached. He did not reach for the shard at once. Instead, he studied the mosaic. Around the edges, written in flowing script, were lines of verse. When north is broken, westward turns. The stone shall sleep where the fire still burns. When silver crown is made anew, the stars shall call the rightful true. He read it twice, then closed his eyes. For the first time, he understood. The mystery was not a call to reclaim power. It was a remembrance, a healing. The pieces of the crown were not trophies. They were echoes, fragments of a unity lost to time and division. Arnor had not fallen to shadow alone. It had fallen to forgetfulness, to silence. And now, the land itself was asking to remember. He reached out, lifted the shard. It was warm, not with heat, but with presence. As he held it, the hum in the chamber deepened slightly. As if in approval, the lights along the walls shimmered just a little brighter, and the mosaic behind him seemed to hold its breath. Elric turned back toward the stair. He did not run. He did not speak. He simply walked, crown shard in hand, mystery awakened in his heart, and a new direction calling him through the stillness. The glade above remained as he had left it, silver trees silent, the air scented with stone and sky. But now, the crowned fragment in his pack pulsed with subtle light, and the runes on the arch no longer glowed. They had faded again, their message given. And in Elric's chest, something had settled, not peace exactly, but purpose. The journey was no longer a wandering. It had become a weaving of the past, of the land, of the crown once broken, and the north, long silent, had begun to whisper once more. Elric did not travel far after emerging from the glade. Though the path wound onward into the hills, and the stars above urged quiet exploration, he felt the need to rest, not his body, but his spirit. The events of the day, the runes, the hidden stair, and the shard now nestled within his satchel, all sat heavily in his thoughts, not as burdens, but as soft revelations still settling like fresh snow upon the branches of his mind. He found a small clearing just above the birch-lined glade, where the hills broke open into a wide sky. The grass here grew wild, brushing gently against his boots as he stepped through, and the scent of dusk carried hints of pine and cold river stone. A large, flat stone sat nestled into the slope, partially covered in moss. He eased down upon it, laying his walking cloak beneath him and setting the crown fragment gently by his side. From this perch, the land unfolded like a painted tapestry. To the west, the misty silhouettes of the blue mountains shimmered in silver blue tones under moonlight. To the east, the weather hills undulated like the spine of some sleeping creature, their backs cloaked in midnight blue. And above, oh, above, the stars had come out in their full grace. They scattered across the sky like ancient jewels, glowing with a steadiness that suggested they remembered more than any living soul below. Elric leaned back and simply breathed. The air here felt older, not stale or heavy, but knowing, like it had seen ages come and go, and still chose to remain gentle. He closed his eyes briefly, letting his breath slow into the rhythm of the breeze. And as he sat in stillness, thoughts rose unbidden, drifting through his mind, not like puzzle pieces, but like melodies long forgotten, now returning in soft echoes. He thought of the verses inscribed around the mosaic. When north is broken, westward turns. The stone shall sleep where the fire still burns. When silver crown is made anew, the stars shall call the rightful true. Each line hummed with meaning now, but none in an urgent way. Rather, they wove through him like gentle reminders. The idea of the North being broken had always seemed to him a historic fact, an end written in the books of lore. Yet tonight, under the stars and above the hidden chamber, it no longer felt like an ending. It felt like a pause, something unfinished, something that had been waiting, not forgotten. And now, with a second shard of the crown in hand, and the soft voice of the land rising once again, Elric began to feel the shape of something not yet spoken. A yearning, not for glory or conquest, but for restoration, for remembrance. He opened his eyes, looking up at the stars. Among them, the familiar constellations of the Dunedain shimmered. The sickle, the bow of Meneldor, and near the zenith, Menelvagor, the swordsman of the sky. His forebears had looked up at these very same lights, and perhaps, in moments of quiet, had felt this same thread of connection. How strange, Elric thought, that the land itself had begun to guide him. That moss had given way, runes had glowed, and a hidden stair had appeared, just for him. But was it truly for him, or simply for the one who was listening closely enough? For the first time, he felt the tug not as mystery, but as memory, something known deep within, even if it had no name, the pull he had felt for weeks, the wind drawing westward, the whispers in dreams. Perhaps it had never been about solving a riddle. Perhaps it was about remembering a promise. The wind brushed against his face again, soft and low, like the whisper of an old friend. The trees around him stirred, not restlessly, but with a hush that welcomed thought. And so, in that moment, Elric began to speak, not aloud, not in voice, but in the inward murmur of reflection that only the stars and the earth could hear. He remembered tales from childhood, of kings who had worn stars upon their brows, of cities now lost to ruin, of a line unbroken but unseen. He had always thought those stories were the realm of bards and books, but tonight they lived again, not through battles or banners, but through stillness and stone, through the whispering runes and the sleeping stair. The past had not died. It had simply quieted, waiting. Elric's thoughts drifted to his father, a quiet man who had lived far from such mysteries. Yet he had always told Elric, "Listen to the land, son. It remembers more than the wisest scroll." At the time, Elric had smiled and thought it poetic. Now he knew it was truth. He took the crown fragment into his hands once more, turning it slowly. The edges were smooth, worn slightly by time, yet the etchings upon it, faint stars, a crescent moon, remained. His fingers traced them, not for knowledge, but for connection. And as he held the shard beneath the stars, a gentle warmth rose from it. Not heat, but comfort, as if the metal remembered what it had once been. And in doing so, it recognized something in him. He set it down again and folded his hands in his lap. Somewhere in the darkness, a nightingale began to sing. Its song was not hurried. It moved with patience, like dew forming on grass or light warming stone. Elric smiled faintly. The world, it seemed, was speaking. He did not need to rush to gather the final pieces. That would come in time. For now, it was enough to feel the heartbeat of the North again. The land was not lost. It was simply sleeping, waiting for one who would walk quietly, listen deeply, and remember gently. And Elric, seated among starlight and moss, realized he did not need to be a hero of tales. He only needed to be present, to walk the old paths, to pick up what had been set down. The broken crown would not be mended in fire or war, but in footsteps, in whispers, in stars, and in silence. He closed his eyes once more, not to forget, but to listen to the wind weaving through ancient branches, to the hush of moss upon stone, to the sigh of Middle-earth remembering. And somewhere deep in the quiet heart of Arnor, Something shifted, like a breath drawn in, long after it had been thought lost. The next morning rose slow and pale, with fingers of silver mist curling through the trees and spilling over the soft hills like whispered breath. Elric stirred before the sun had fully broken the horizon, stretching quietly from his bedroll of wool and moss, the crowned fragment tucked safely within his satchel. He sat for a long while in the silence, letting the cold morning air clear the softness of dreams from his mind. The path before him was less clear now, not in direction, but in meaning. He knew he must walk further, that more of the old crown's truth waited ahead, but he no longer hurried. Something within him had shifted during the quiet reflection of the night before. The road was no longer just a journey outward, but inward as well. He followed a gentle slope northward, through birchwood groves dappled with golden leaves, the trees whispering to one another in the breeze. Here and there, the scent of pine needles, warmed by distant sun, mingled with the dampness of mossy stones. The path beneath his feet was not carved or marked, but seemed to shape itself gently ahead, perhaps an old game trail, or perhaps something older, quieter, and half-remembered by the land itself. By midday, as he paused beside a brook to fill his flask, he heard it, a light footfall not his own, and the sound of soft humming. Not threatening, not startling, it was the kind of presence that announced itself like the sun behind clouds, unseen but felt. Elric stood and turned, and from the shadows beneath the birches, a figure emerged. He was tall, though not imposing, his cloak gray-green, like dew on morning leaves. A hood lay back against his shoulders, revealing a weathered face framed by dark hair streaked with silver. His eyes were calm and steady, eyes that had seen far places and long years. A ranger, no doubt, a Dunedain. "Peace, traveler," the man said with a nod, his voice low and even. "You walk roads seldom walked these days." "And yet not alone, it seems," Elric replied with a quiet smile. The ranger's gaze lingered on the satchel Elric carried, then back to his eyes. He stepped forward and crouched near the brook, washing his hands in the cold, clear water. "There is a stir in the north," the ranger said, not looking up. "The stones whisper, the trees bend a little more westward, and dreams, those too, are waking." Elric sat across from him, letting the silence stretch like a blanket. "Do you believe the old stories?" Elric asked softly. The ranger looked up, not with surprise, but recognition. "I do," he said, "and I believe the land does too. It remembers what the proud forget. Not all who wander seek thrones, but sometimes the road calls to those who listen." He reached into his cloak and pulled forth a small flat stone, a token etched with the sigil of Arnor, worn but clear. "My name is Thalen," he said. "My father walked these lands when Fornost was still a shadow. He taught me to listen, not just with ears, but with memory." They spoke then, not of plans or quests, but of old places, of the Barrow Downs and Bree, of the lost tower at Amon Sul, and the hidden glens near Lake Evandem. Thalen spoke slowly, in the way of those who do not wish to disturb the air, and Elric listened, each name lighting a new branch of wonder in his thoughts. "You carry something old," Thalen said at last, gesturing toward the satchel. Something broken, but not ruined. Elric nodded and drew the fragment forth, resting it gently between them on the grass. Thalen did not reach for it. He simply looked, and the look was enough. "You're not the first to seek its pieces," Thalen said quietly, "but perhaps you're the first to carry it with silence rather than pride." Elric looked down at the shard. "I never sought a crown," he murmured, "which is why it finds you," Thalen replied. As the afternoon drifted gently toward evening, they shared a meal of dried fruit and soft bread. Thalen told a quiet tale of his youth, of a night he had stood watch near the ruins of Enuminas and seen lights dance across the lake. Not torches, but glimmers, like stars reflected on the water's surface when no stars shone above. "They say the lake remembers," he whispered. "Even now, beneath its still waters, the throne room waits, empty, but not forgotten." When the light grew long and gold between the trees, Thalen stood. "I go east," he said, "but your road lies westward. You'll find a stone arch not far from here. Follow it down. The path may seem broken, but trust the wind. It knows the turns." He placed a hand briefly on Elric's shoulder, walked slowly, listened deeply. What is lost was not taken. It was laid down, waiting for the right hands to lift it once more. And with a quiet rustle of leaves, Thalen was gone. Elric lingered until twilight, then rose and followed the gentle rise beyond the brook. True to the ranger's word, a low arch of stone marked the next path, a weathered remnant, half hidden by ivy, its keystone marked with the faint image of a crown flanked by stars. The trail wound downward into a narrow valley, and as he walked, the world seemed to soften again. The wind curled around him like old memories, and the stars above blinked to life, one by one. At the edge of a low ridge, a small firelight flickered, carefully banked and nearly hidden. A figure sat beside it, her posture calm, hands wrapped around a clay cup. Her cloak shimmered slightly in the moonlight, and her hair fell long and silver across her back. She looked up as Elric approached and smiled, not with surprise, but as if she had known he would come. "Welcome, Elric of the North," she said gently. He blinked. "You know me?" "I know your footsteps," she replied. "The earth has felt them, and your heart, it stirs the air." She motioned for him to sit. "I am Lyrian. I keep watch over the roads between shadow and memory." Her voice held the softness of wind over grass, and her eyes held time. They sat for a long while, sipping from the warm cup she offered, a tea made from mountain herbs, bitter and calming. Lyrian spoke not of prophecy, nor fate, but of remembering, of how the old kings walked not to rule, but to serve, of how the true crown was never gold, but memory held in trust. She drew from her cloak a piece of cloth, and within it a broken gem, blue as evening sky, marked with the 7 stars of Elendil, one of the crown's inlays, long lost. "I found this near the River Forn," she said. "It sang in my dreams until I found it, but it was not for me to keep." Elric accepted it with care, his breath catching quietly. The gem was warm, though it had not touched fire. "You carry the silence well," Lyrian whispered, Not all mysteries seek solving, some seek hearing. You have heard. And as the stars wheeled above them, Elric realized he was no longer seeking the crown. He was becoming part of its return, not through power, but through presence. The path ahead still stretched unknown, but he no longer walked alone. That night, the world breathed slower. Elric sat beside a gentle fire, its flames low and golden, casting dancing shadows against the stone wall of a half-crumbled ruin in the hills. The arch of stars above him was wide and deep, the sky brushed in hues of indigo and silver. The wind moved softly, weaving through the grass like a lullaby hummed by the earth itself. Somewhere nearby, a nightjar called, a long, low trill that rose and fell like memory. Across from him, Lyrian sat wrapped in her twilight cloak. Her long silver hair shimmered like mist, and her gaze was turned upward to the stars, as though she were reading old stories from the sky. Between them, the fragment of the crown rested on a fold of cloth, its edges worn, but its shape still noble, unfinished, yes, but waiting. After a long silence, Elric broke the hush, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Lyrian," he asked gently, "do you know the stories of the crown? I mean, not just the history, but the old tales, the ones people no longer tell?" She smiled, one of those smiles that come slowly and feel like they've traveled through centuries to reach your face. "Ah," she said, drawing her knees closer to the fire. "I know a few. Not the ones in books, mind you. Those are heavy with dates and titles. But the ones whispered by firelight. Yes, I know some of those." Elric nodded, watching the flames flicker. "Would you tell me one?" Lyrian looked at him for a long moment, as though measuring his heart. Then, with a slow nod, she began, her voice steady, calm and low, like water moving over stone. "Long ago," she said, "when the northern kingdom still stood proud, and the towers of Anuminas associated with silver banners, there was a boy born under a falling star. His mother was a weaver, his father a keeper of the gate. They were not royal, nor highborn, but the moment he opened his eyes, an old woman of the village whispered, 'This one carries old fire in his bones.'" Elric leaned slightly forward, entranced. "They named him Calin," she continued, "and as he grew, he could sense the hum of stone, the whisper of trees. He spoke little, but listened much. The king of Arnor heard of this boy and summoned him, not to make him a knight or soldier, but to ask him questions. Questions only the land remembered. One day the king asked him, 'Where lies the strength of Arnor?' Calon did not answer with swords or banners. He led the king to a quiet glade, where wildflowers bloomed in the pattern of stars, and he said, 'Here, in the places still listening.'" Lyrian paused, and Elric noticed her eyes shimmered, reflecting the stars above. "They say Calon never grew old," she whispered. "He walks still when the night is quiet and the stars speak clearly. Some say he appears where the land remembers, guarding not a throne, but a memory." Elric sat in reverent silence. His breath was slow, deep. "That's beautiful," he said at last. Lyrian nodded. "It's one of many. The land is full of stories like that, buried under stone and time, waiting for someone to ask again. The fire crackled gently. Somewhere, an owl called once, then fell quiet. "I have one too," Elric said softly, "though I don't know it as well." Lyrian turned to him, attentive. "My grandfather used to speak of the breath of the north. I always thought it was just a cold wind, something from the mountains. But once, when I was small, he told me it was more than that, and he said it was the voice of kings, of those who ruled not with fear, but with stillness. He said that if you ever heard the North's true breath, you'd remember who you were meant to be." Lyrian's expression turned thoughtful. "Not all who wear crowns are remembered," she murmured, "but those who listen to the land, they never leave it." Elric stared into the flames, his heart softened by the warmth, not just of fire, but of the quiet bond forming between them, a companionship built not on declarations, but on shared listening. She reached into her satchel and pulled forth a small leather-bound journal. It was worn, its edges curled, its strap frayed with age. "This belonged to my mother," Lyrian said. "She was one of the Grey Watchers, a keeper of song and tale, not a bard exactly, more like a weaver of echoes." She opened the book gently, and from it she read, "In the northern hills, where the frost breathes slow, a crown once sang in moonlit glow, not forged of gold nor silver braid, but woven where the starlight laid." Elric closed his eyes, letting the words soak into him. There was magic here, not in spellwork, but in remembrance, the kind that lingers like the scent of lilac after rain. "The stories," he whispered, "they feel alive." Lyrian nodded. "Because they are. Middle-earth remembers those who listen, even the stars. They hold more than light." She leaned back and pointed to the night sky, to a constellation shaped like a crescent bow. "That," she said, "is called Telumatar by the elves, the warrior of the sky. But in old Arnorian lore, it was the archer of memory, said to shoot arrows not of iron, but of song. Each arrow was a tale, loosed into the dark, to awaken what was forgotten." They sat in silence for a long while, letting the stories fade into the night. Then Elric, after a long moment of stillness, asked one final question. "Do you think the crown will ever be whole again?" Lyrian looked at him, her expression gentle. "It already is," she whispered, "not in shape, but in meaning. You carry its spirit, not in your hands, but in your steps, in the way you listen, and in how you do not demand the land to speak, but wait until it offers its voice." The fire crackled once more, low and comforting. "Rest now," Lyrian said, tucking her cloak around her. "Tomorrow you'll walk again. But tonight we sit with stars and stories, and that is enough." Elric lay back upon the mossy ground, his eyes drifting toward the sky, the stars gently swimming in his vision. And as the fire faded to embers, and the night wrapped around them like a warm, remembered tale, the wind moved through the valley again, soft, slow, and full of memory. Morning in the northern hills came not with bold sunlight, but with a soft, silvery mist that hugged the roots of the trees and rolled lazily over the stones. Dew gathered like tiny pearls on moss-covered branches, and birds began their slow, tentative songs, one note at a time, as if the land itself was still waking from a deep, thoughtful dream. Elric rose quietly from where he had slept beneath a half-ruined arch, the last fragment of an old Arnorian outpost. Lyrian was already up, seated on a nearby rock with her hood drawn low, her eyes tracing the gentle movement of the mist as though it were a map only she could read. He stretched slowly, the coolness of dawn brushing over his skin, and he touched the broken crown where it lay in its cloth, still nestled between them like a sleeping memory. It felt heavier this morning, not in weight, but in meaning. "Are you ready?" she asked softly, without turning. "I think so," Elric replied, his voice still thick with sleep, but steady. They walked in silence for much of the morning. The path they followed was older than any map, etched only in the memory of trees and stones. Lyrian led with instinct more than direction, pausing often to listen, not for sounds, but for stillness. Where it grew thickest, she would nod and carry on. They passed the remains of an ancient watchtower, its walls long since crumbled, ivy climbing its stones like patient green fingers. They passed old cairns, quiet and undisturbed, marked with forgotten runes now softened by centuries of wind. And at last, near midday, they came to a valley unlike any Elric had seen. It was hidden between two ridges, shielded from view, and cloaked in a soft golden light that filtered through a gap in the clouds above. At the center of the valley stood a ring of upright stones, each carved, ancient, and leaning gently inward as though whispering to each other. In the middle of the circle, there was a pedestal, simple and unadorned, but as they approached, Elric felt something stir deep inside him. Not fear, not excitement, just a profound hush. The hush of deep memory, of recognition. Lyrian stopped at the edge of the stone ring. "This is where it began," she said, her voice like wind brushing a still lake, "and this is where it must rest." Elric stepped forward, the crown in his hands. His breath slowed, the wind stilled, even the birds grew quiet. As he reached the center, he noticed markings on the pedestal, ancient script from the time of the first kings. Not words of warning or power, but something far more simple. The North remembers its own. He placed the crown gently upon the stone, and for a moment, nothing happened. The world held its breath. Then, the light changed, not brighter, not blinding, but warmer. It spread gently across the valley, brushing over the stones like a loving hand. The moss grew greener, the air took on the scent of deep pine and mountain herbs, and the crown, its broken edge, shimmered softly, as if the land was welcoming it home. Lyrian stepped beside him. "It was never about reforging the metal," she whispered. "It was about restoring the memory, the spirit. That's what the North truly lost. Not its throne, but its voice." Elric's eyes stung with quiet tears, not of sorrow, but of release. "I always thought I needed to fix something," he said, "but maybe I just needed to remember." She nodded, her expression serene. "You've done what few still can. You listened." The wind picked up slightly, moving in gentle waves through the stones. The trees along the ridge whispered their approval. The land itself felt lighter. They sat beside the ring for a long while, saying little, watching the crown rest in its rightful place. not in a hall of gold or a vault of stone, but beneath the open sky where the stars would find it again. And as the day stretched into evening, a quiet procession began. First came the foxes, 2 of them, russet and sleek, trotting silently into the circle's edge before sitting, watching. Then a trio of deer, tall and unafraid, their breath misting the air as they bowed their heads toward the crown. Birds gathered in the trees, not singing, but observing, like members of an old court long dismissed, now returning to their sacred place. Even the shadows seemed to pause at the edge of the valley, unwilling to interrupt. "I think the land forgives us," Elric said, barely a whisper. Lyrian smiled, tears on her cheeks. "It never hated us, it just forgot how to speak." As twilight descended, the mist returned, soft and silver, but this time it felt different. Not cold, but comforting, like a blanket pulled gently over the shoulders of a child drifting to sleep. They made camp just outside the stone ring. The fire they built was small and steady, and over it they shared bread and quiet memories. "I will stay with the crown a while," Lyrian said as they sat. "There is still listening to be done here." Elric nodded. "And I think I'll return to the towns, not as a hero, but as a storyteller." She looked at him, understanding. "You'll carry the tale?" "I will." He stared into the fire a long time, then looked up at the stars. They seemed brighter now, closer, and in his heart, something had shifted, not a dramatic transformation, but a gentle realignment. As if a compass had quietly corrected itself, pointing not toward duty or destiny, but toward peace. In the days that followed, Elric walked again through the lands of Arnor. He passed through villages with moss on their rooftops and old wells in their squares. He visited the broken halls of Fornost, sat in the fields of Amonsul, and stood at the banks of Lake Evendim, where the ruins of Anuminas still kissed the water. And everywhere he went, he listened. He listened to the stories whispered by wind, to the creak of old trees, to the laughter of children playing where banners once flew. And sometimes, in the quietest moments, he would take out a small, smooth stone he had found near the crown's resting place. It was ordinary in shape, but when held in moonlight, it shimmered faintly. It reminded him to be still, to remember years later, when he was gray-haired and gentle-voiced, people called him the Lantern of the North, not because he carried light, but because he helped others see. And though he never spoke of the crown again, those who met him swore they heard something different in the wind after he left, a song too faint to name, but old and kind and full of grace. The broken crown of Arnor remained where he left it, nestled among the stones, bathed by sun and snow and stars. And with it, the North remembered, not its might, but its soul, and that, in the end, was all it ever needed. Closing reflection and farewell, 1,000 words, section for the sleep story titled The Broken Crown of Arnor, Restoring the North's Forgotten Pride, told in a soft, calming tone to help the listener drift peacefully into rest. Hello again, my dear sleepy listener. If your eyes are still open and your thoughts still wander softly across the hills of Middle-earth, let us rest here together just a little longer. The stars are high above us now, scattered gently like silver petals across the velvet sky, and the wind has quieted to a whisper, barely more than the breath of the land itself. The story has reached its end, and yet, not quite. For some tales never truly finish. They echo onward, quietly, like the ripple of a stone dropped into a still pond. Tonight, you walked in the footsteps of Elric, a humble soul with a heart full of wonder, who asked no crown and sought no glory, and yet restored something greater than any treasure, the memory of belonging, of old songs and gentle truths. He listened, not just with his ears, but with his spirit, and in doing so, he reminded the North of what it once was, not just a kingdom of towers and banners, but a place of light, of story, and of soul. The broken crown was never meant to be worn again. It was meant to be remembered, and you, sleepy traveler, have walked beside him. You've watched the firelight flicker upon ancient stones. You've breathed in the scent of moss and rain in hidden valleys. You've heard the silence of the wild, the kind that speaks louder than words. And now, you carry a small part of that memory too. So take a slow, deep breath with me. Let it fill your chest like the soft air above Lake Evandem, and let it go just as gently like the wind through the tall grass of the northern hills. It's time now to let the story settle within you, not as noise, but as calm, not as a riddle to solve, but as a gentle feeling, warm and peaceful, like a memory you never knew you had. Let the thoughts fade and the stillness come. Maybe, somewhere in your dreams tonight, you'll find yourself wandering a quiet forest path where the leaves shimmer with starlight and the rivers hum old lullabies. Perhaps you'll sit beside Lyrian once more, watching mist curl through stone circles, or follow Elric's footsteps back to the firelit halls of memory. Or maybe you'll simply rest deeply, quietly, knowing that the world of Middle-earth, with all its wonder, is still waiting just beyond the edge of sleep. And before I go, let me leave you with this small truth. In a world of crowns and quests, the gentlest acts, listening, remembering, walking softly, may be the most powerful of all. So sleep now, my sleepy traveler. The stars are keeping watch, the lands of Arnor are at peace, and you are home. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with silver mists, warm hearths, and the quiet songs of the West. Sleep well.